Welcome to the Monday Morning Tennis Rant. I'm going to talk about what happened on the ATP, the WTA, and in general, the world of tennis the week prior. And let's start off by giving some love to the 250s. For you guys that don't know, pro tournaments are structured in 250s, 500s, thousands, and then the Grand Slams. That we're talking here about the amount of points that's given out to the players. And of course, everybody's obsessed with the Grand Slams and the Master Series tournaments. And sometimes these smaller tournaments get ignored, but I can tell you that there is some unbelievable tennis being played at these smaller tournaments and some really exciting matches. And I want to start off by talking about what happened in Dallas. It's a 250 and it was very strong. There's a lot of strong Americans right now, but an American didn't win. It was Wu that won, and this was back in the day one of the best juniors in the world. He was ranked #1 in the world in juniors, and this might be the breakthrough. I want you to check out some highlights of Wu. He played some unbelievable tennis. He was on absolute fire. Maybe this is the breakthrough that a lot of people have been waiting for. He finally won his first tournament. But I want to give credit where credit is due to John Isner, one of my favorite players ever. And in my opinion, he's one of the most underappreciated players of all time. Why is he underappreciated? Because he's American. Americans are always held to a very high standard, undeservingly so, because there were some great champions in the past. Chris Evert, Pete Sampras, Andrew Agassi, John McEnroe, Jimmy Connors, the list goes on, so that even someone like Andy Roddick, who's a great champion, #1 player in the world, US Open champion, was also underappreciated. And we're talking about John Isner. He not only is underappreciated, he often gets hate and people are making fun of the way he plays. But I'm a big John Isner fan. I can tell you that I followed him very closely when he first turned pro, because he played for University of Georgia, my favorite school ever. I had the pleasure of playing there. The regionals were held at the University of Georgia, a beautiful tennis facility, home of the Collegiate Tennis Hall of Fame. And John Isner played for Georgia, had a great college career, maybe one of the best college tennis careers of all time. I want to give a shout out to Steve Johnson as well, who had an amazing college career at USC as well. But in any case, I followed John Isner very closely, and he never actually won the NCAA singles tournament. He lost in a final to Somdev Demarman. But that year, he turned pro. And I was tracking his results on the Futures Tour. And a lot of the college players that go on to play Futures, they kind of struggle. They do well, some of them, but they're not like destroying the field. It takes them a while to break through, right? And some don't ever break through that were dominating in college. But in any case, John Isner won on the Futures Tour. And then very shortly after that, he played the tournament in Washington, D.C., which was a 500, and he made it all the way to the final. And from that moment on, he was a very consistent player, always ranked in the top 20, had a lot of titles under his belt, also a great clay court player. You got to understand that John Isner is a great clay court player as well. John Isner is an absolute beast, and in my opinion, he's very underappreciated. He is the second best server of all time. I think Goran Ivanišević is the greatest server that's ever lived, but I'm going to put John Isner at #2. He's going to break all serve records because he's going to play for a while. He's 37 now. He's still playing well because he made it to the final of the Dallas tournament. I didn't even tell you that. You see, my Monday morning rant is starting off rusty, but Wu beat Isner in the final in 3 tiebreaks, 14-12 in the third set tiebreak. So the reason why I'm talking about John Isner is because he was in the final at the age of 37, still playing well, still capable of posting big results. And I think he's going to keep going for a while, play for at least 3 more years, and he's going to break all serve records. He's going to be regarded as the greatest server in the history of the game, but in my opinion, I'm going to always give that title to Goran Ivanišević. For you guys that know, you know what I'm talking about. Goran was a lefty, and he didn't play that long. He retired very early, and if he would have played for the same amount of time as John Isner, he would have had a lot more aces, because Goran was the absolute serving machine. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But in any case, big shout out to John Isner. Now, go on to the next tournament. And I want to talk about a player called Baez. And this is a super interesting story because back in the day when I used to play actively, we had a thing called a clay court specialist. These were guys who only played on clay. They wouldn't even show up for the grass court season in Wimbledon. And these players are somewhat dying out. You know why? Because tennis is getting uniform. In other words, everybody plays very similarly. It's a power baseline game. You don't see a variety in styles that much anymore. But there are still some players like Sebastian Baez who prefer the clay. And it's so interesting his story because the last tournament where he did well was in Bastad, Sweden in the summer of 2022, where he made it to the final. And he went on a big losing streak. He barely won any matches until last week, where he won in Cordoba, which is the official start of the clay court season tournament in Argentina. He beat Coria in the final, who is Guillermo Coria's brother, another clay court great. So it's interesting for me to watch the clay court season. I've always loved it. I've always loved clay court specialists, and I think it's something that's missing from tennis today, the variety in styles, which brings me to the next tournament in Montpellier, France, where Cressy made the final, who is a servant volleyer, which is great to see, and he lost to Sinner. And I don't really talk about Sinner a lot on my channel, but to me, Sinner's game is showing the intuitive tennis methodology at its best, because you don't need big muscles. You don't need a strong, powerful frame to produce power in tennis. Tennis is a game of using the natural ways to create power, momentum. And we see that someone like Sinner, who has a very small frame, he's not a very muscular guy, hits the ball unbelievably hard with a tremendous amount of power. And he's not the only one. A guy like Medvedev, very similar. And there's other guys with the same build that can produce a tremendous amount of power without having big muscles. So that just goes to show you that the game of tennis is something that's very unique. Now, I will say that, of course, you need very strong legs in tennis, and Sinner does have very strong legs, and he's very fast. So that's something that's very necessary to play tennis at that elite level. But when we're talking about the upper body, you don't need that to have big muscles in order to generate a lot of power. And I think when you watch Sinner, you see that such a small frame, but he's producing a lot of heat on those ground strokes. And I think with Sinner, the problem is that he's got a lot of pressure on him. They're expecting him to win a Grand Slam and to be the next big thing. And he's kind of underperforming in the big tournaments and doing really well in the small ones. So I do think there's going to come a time where he's going to break through, like he did in Miami, reaching the final. He's going to start posting some better results. It's just a matter of time. I think sometimes the pressure can build up a little too much and lead to some poor results, but I think over time he's going to be okay. Djokovic is not going to win every single Grand Slam. There's going to be a time where Djokovic is going to lose, and one of these younger guys is going to have a chance to get that Grand Slam title. So we're just going to have to wait and see. But I'm a big Jannik Sinner fan. Now on to the women. And there were some unbelievable matches in the women too. The final in Abu Dhabi between Bencic and Samsonova was phenomenal. Bencic saved 3 match points. And we're talking about power tennis on the women. In my opinion, the top 3 power hitters on the women's tour are Samsonova, Rybakina, and Sabalenka. Those are the strongest hitters in the world. And if you watch Samsonova play, he's got a tremendous amount of power, and I can see her being a top 10 player very soon, possibly this year. And Bencic, to me, is like a Hingis with power. And I think she deserves to have at least 1 Grand Slam under her name because she's a phenomenal player. And let's move on to the tournament in Linz, Austria, where finally Potapova won a tournament. This might be her breakthrough. She was one of the best juniors in the world. Big expectations on her. And she's playing better and better. And maybe this is the time where she's going to finally break through, make it to the top 20, possibly the top 10. And shout out also goes to Petra Martic, who was in the final of Linz, and she's from Split, which is the greatest city in the world. So that concludes the Monday morning tennis rant for this week. I will see you guys on the next one. Have a good week, everybody.